So my name's Suzanne Harrison. I'm the director of Corda, which is part of BAE Systems. Most of you have heard of BAE Systems, maybe not Corda. So Corda is a centre of excellence for modelling and analysis within BAE Systems. We provide support across the whole of the global business and also externally into the MOD, other government departments and other commercial areas. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of some of the things we've been doing. I'm conscious, having listened to the conversations this morning, that there's quite a bit of overlap with what I want to say, which on one hand is quite good because we're all thinking in the same way. On the other hand, I don't want to bore you with a lot of the same things, so I'll go over them as quickly as I can. So first of all, I think we've mentioned a few times about looking into the future. This is our little crystal ball. If we had one of those, a lot of business people say, if I had one of those, wouldn't it be great? You'd probably win the lottery as well, which would be even better. I'm not saying that we can win the lottery by doing modelling, by the way. So if we could look into the future, a lot of times when I'm talking to the business leaders across the business, how will I know how I'll perform? You can't possibly tell me how I'm going to perform. How much is it going to cost? How much risk am I going to take then in my program? If I make certain decisions about how we're going to run a program, what risks are there? How much is it going to cost? And how can I mitigate those risks? And the big thing here really is, what if things change? So quite often I speak to people across the business, and they've shut themselves in a room for 3 weeks. They've come up with how it's going to perform. They've come up with how it's going to cost. They've done a lot of spreadsheet type work, got a good view of how it's going to be. And then you say, what happens if? And they go, oh, we're going to need to lock ourselves in a room for another 3 weeks and come up with it again. And this is where you start to get the real power of being able to use modelling. So my suggestion here is that computational modelling is the next best thing that we have to a crystal ball. We've talked about complexity quite a lot this morning as well. Quite a few people have mentioned it. And quite often around the business, as I go around talking to people, they say, when should we get you guys involved? When is it something we can just do it ourselves? And when do we need to get you involved? And we sort of talk a bit around when it gets complex. But of course, most things get complex very quickly. And I've had a lot of people come to me again where they've been trying to map something on a whiteboard, or they've been trying to effectively produce something in PowerPoint. I had one person come to me and say, I've put something in PowerPoint. I've got slide 1, this is what's going to happen on day 1 of the contract. Slide 2 is what's going to happen on day 2. Slide 3 is what's going to happen on day 3. And at this point, his brain has kind of exploded. And what you realise, what he's actually trying to create, if you think back to when many of us were kids, you used to have those little flick books. You could flick through it, and it would go, and you could see what was happening with Mickey Mouse or whatever moving. In my mind, that's what they're sort of trying to create here. And you go, well, isn't that a simulation? Let's simulate that, and we can do that so much easier, so much quicker. And I often liken it to squeezing a balloon. I'm sure this is an analogy most of you in this room have heard. We've talked a little bit earlier about people working in silos across an organisation. That's certainly true for an organisation the size of BAE Systems. You'll have somebody in one part of the business going, wow, I've managed to save £1 million here, and someone else goes, yeah, but you've added costs into my area. And so this concept of squeezing that balloon, I think, is really, really important. A simple example of that, we're going to buy some new vans to do some logistics, the sorts of things we talked about this morning. They're cheaper vans, isn't that brilliant? We've saved lots of money. But have we really understood the reliability of those vans, the maintenance requirements, the supply of those? What if we need to train people to use those vans differently? Being able to look across that whole enterprise and understand it. But then if we can take it even further to not only understand the area we're working in, but also our customers and our suppliers and that whole ecosystem, the whole enterprise. And what I would always say to people is, squeezing that balloon doesn't really help, even if some of those costs move outside of your own organisation. It's about how we take some of that air out of that balloon. For us, it's a real balancing act. So here we've got nice little scales that's all trying to balance us around. So we've got, on one side, as a company, we need to make money. We're not a charity, we're there to make some money. But we also need to do it at a cost that's affordable to our customer and achieve the performance that ultimately the end customer needs, whether that be platform availability, spares availability, whatever it might be. And for a lot of our MOD customers, it's effectively about providing that military effect. So how do we make sure we can balance all of these against each other? So the role that we see ourselves in is a lot more complex. In the old days, we might have built a few airplanes, which in itself is complex enough. But today what we're doing is we're providing a lot of the parts. We're also fixing a lot of the aircraft. We're also making bits that have become obsolescent so we can use them going forward. And in some cases, we're starting to even be involved in using those platforms, and that might be helping to train pilots or navigators. So the world is changing, and what we're seeing is that shift of risk and who's taking what risk and therefore what opportunities as well is changing. So in the past, we would have very much been in that sort of bottom right-hand corner there, or left-hand corner, the way you're looking at it. Now we're taking on a lot more responsibility. And as you start to understand and model that, and a lot of people have talked this morning about that transparency and how by working together, if you can work with your customer, with yourselves, with your suppliers, to really understand where that light blue and dark blue line should fit, you can start to try and get a better solution across everyone. So I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple examples. I was quite keen to get to the examples quite quickly. So I've got two examples. The first one I'm going to go through quite quickly. But as you can think of as an organisation inside of BAE, we have some really big models. There's a lot of data analytics. There's a lot of modelling going on. But to make it simple, in one case, what we have is a high-level dashboard. You can't see all the details that's going on here, but what this is doing is it's running from 2012 and now in 2013. So it's running quite quickly through. And what you're able to see is at what point, where are aircraft at different points in time, how many are available for use, how many are different types of maintenance. And that's just giving a very high-level view of something that's very, very complicated underneath, to be able to really be able to get a feel for what it's doing. And as you can imagine, all this data is being captured, so you can analyse that and look at different runs and what the impact is. Clearly a lot quicker than in real term. I won't keep it going until we get to present day, but that's sort of an idea of some of the dashboards that we might use. The other one I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of, because I wanted to get away from really, really big, complex problems and look at something that maybe is a little bit more relatable to organisations that are slightly smaller. So this is about managing an upgrade programme. It happens to be of fast jet aircraft, but it is relevant, and we have actually, in some cases, changed the little icon on our model to be something else, just to demo it, and sometimes that goes down a bit better because not everyone produces fast jet aircraft. But it is relevant to any fleet that you might need to upgrade. So there's a number of things we need to look at. How many maintenance bays do we need? And one of the things, we're talking about this cost-performance trade-off. We have to do maintenance here, we have to do upgrade, we also have to do pre-paint, and we have to paint the aircraft. So at one level, you could have every single maintenance track or maintenance bay could do everything. So multi-purpose bays. Or you could have one that just does maintenance, one that does upgrade, one that does paint. And if you think about that, if you've got a multi-purpose one, you've got maximum flexibility, but you've probably got maximum cost as well. The other side of the coin, you get less flexibility, but you can keep your costs down. So being able to trade those off is going to be really key as you're thinking about this type of problem. How many test rigs do we need? So at certain points, as an aircraft comes to the end of all its maintenance and upgrade, a little rig needs to go out and make sure that it's fine to go out of the hangar. How many of those do we need? What will the throughput rate be? Will we get them out in time? Where are the bottlenecks occurring? And if we remove one bottleneck, where does the bottleneck pop up? What level of resourcing do we need? So if we throw a few more people at it or a few more bits of kit at it, can we do it a bit quicker? Does that matter? And if we are going to throw more people at it, where do we throw them at it? And what's the impact of any delays in the system? So that's sort of a quick overview of some of the questions we were asking. And I think as someone alluded to earlier, we did not have all of those questions at the beginning of looking at this piece of work. And indeed, it wasn't obvious at the beginning that even the different types of tracks was important. It was something that emerged as we had the engagement, as people talked about before, with the decision makers, with the people in the boardroom, and being able to go backwards and forwards over these things. So I've got a bit of a demo of this model, but before I go into it, I'm just going to show you the screenshot. It's got a big block over it, because we use this sometimes as sort of a rolling brief when they're on their own. It's a very simple model on the surface of it. A lot of it was about how we engage with people to understand what changes we need to make. We have sort of dumbed it down slightly in terms of making sure we've hidden any real data. But what we've got here is we've got some tracks. These are maintenance tracks. We've got 16 of them, as I said, and the aircraft are going to come in, have their maintenance at the top, their upgrade at the bottom, their pre-paint, and their paint. We've got these little test rigs that pop out as needed. One of the things that was really interesting was that the team already had one test rig, and they were going to buy 2 more test rigs because they felt they needed to de-risk it. Absolutely, they had to get this done within 5 years. As we did this modelling, we found they only needed to buy 1 more test rig. So immediately that's £1 million plus savings that they've made. So I'm going to run this for you, hopefully. It's a very simple model. So what you can see is we've got these 16 bays. Starting to run? Yes. There is a damages clause, so if we don't get finished within 5 years, we will have to pay some money back, which is never a good thing. So we set them up with this configuration. So you can see there we've got 4 maintenance tracks, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 maintenance and upgrade. You can see the test rigs are going out as aircraft are finishing, and you're starting to see the aircraft queuing to come into the hangar. So it's very visual. We were able to take a lot of people through this and show them how it was going to work. We're getting quite a queue appearing now here. You can see that it gets up to about 13 aircraft in the queue. After doing multiple runs, it came up over 5 years. So the probability of that damage clause was likely. So we could increase the facility, we could renegotiate the contract, or we could play around with the layout in the hangar, which is what we did with the team. So we reassigned a couple of the tracks around, and then we ran it again. This time we got a queue of 7 aircraft rather than 13 aircraft, which sounds a bit better. Again, you can run it and you see your test rig going out. And when you get to the end of this, the overall was 4.9 years. One of the reasons I like this one, and this was run over a number of different options, so we could see the different probabilities of different things happening. One of the things I really like about this one is, we did it over 5 years ago, so we've been able to get that feedback to say, yes, we did it and it happened as your model said it would, which is, as many of us know that have done modelling, by the time you've moved on to do something else, you've lost the sort of the view of what actually happened with anything you built. The fact that it, as someone said earlier, was about answering a question, not just doing a nice exercise. But the other thing that was really good with it is it was very visual. So not only did we present this at the beginning of the 5-year contract internally to give, this was actually a piece of work being done in the Middle East. So firstly, the guy going out had told his wife he'd be back in 5 years, so this gave him the confidence that he could go home and say, yes, dear, I will be back in 5 years. But we also presented this to the Middle East customer, and to give him confidence at the beginning of the contract that we weren't just going in without knowing what we were doing. And they absolutely really, really loved this. They was like, wow, there's some science behind it. So that helped. And as they were going through the contract, someone mentioned earlier, yes, this is kind of a one-off question, but actually as they went through the contract, other questions were coming up and said, could you run that model again? The Typhoon guys are asking if they can borrow our hangar for a bit. What impact would it have on us? And so you can start to really understand, going forward, what those impacts would be. So I just wanted to finally, one final slide on a little bit of myth busting. Just wanted to set a few things that people might have thought about modelling that for me is something that I'm particularly passionate about pushing back on. And these are things I hear around the business all the time. I'm sure I wouldn't hear these in this room today. But a lot of people say, I'm not ready for modelling yet. Go away, I'm not quite ready yet. I would say it's never too early to start. This modelling I've actually just showed you, you've probably picked up on, as I said, we did it once we were on contract. Wouldn't it have been great if we'd done it before we were on contract? And some of those things some of those levers we could have pulled, we were quite restricted in the levers we could pull by the time we were actually on contract. Maybe a slightly larger hangar, for example, might have been better. So it's never too early to start. And starting to do something early and getting people's buy-in and ideas is a good thing to do, even if you don't have a lot of data. Because that's the other thing we get all the time. We have no data. And I think, again, as someone said earlier, if you are going to make a decision without doing modelling, isn't that worse than making a decision with doing some? And actually, even if you don't have data, no, you can start to do something. You can start to understand the key levers and drivers. You can start to understand which bits of data are really, really key and which bits don't have that much impact in your overall environment. So I would say, obviously for some of the big models, once you're getting into day-to-day usage, clearly you need data. But to start with, you can do something without data. It's only worthwhile for large organisations. I would say, as everyone said so far, you know, the amount of modelling that you can do, it's always good to have more rigour behind the decisions you're making. And if nothing else, it gives you that audit trail as to why you've made a decision. Why have you made this decision and not that decision? And it just helps you with that communication. And finally, the one we hear often is, it's going to take time and I already know the answer. We have a lot of experts around who know how things are going to work. Why do you want to bother modelling it when you're going to get that answer anyway? I would say that there's always more than one answer. I would say that, you know, there's always things that come up that are not intuitive when you model these things, and you see things that perhaps you hadn't predicted. And finally, it helps you communicate. The number of times I see really, really clever experts going, well, it's obvious that we should do this, shouldn't we? It's really hard to get across to people who are not experts in that field why it's obvious to do things that you want to do. So having something that you can talk through logically really, really helps. And that was what I wanted to say today.